We'll now go for Q&A session. We'll start with the local media first. Okay, members, local media. Local media? Okay, from this corner please. Yang row kedua ni. Yes.
Good evening, Datuk.
Could you introduce yourself?
Good evening, Datuk Sri. I'm Sulin from the Malay Mail Online.
Good evening.
I would like to ask, when exactly did the Malaysian military spot MH370 on its turn back across the peninsula? And upon spotting it, what exactly did the military do? Did they contact with the civil aviation authorities, for example, or with MAS, or did they try to contact the plane itself? Thanks.
I don't have the actual details with me today, and I'm very cautious and very careful what I say in the PCs these days. So it is very important for me to get clarification on that. But if you guys have got anything to add to that,
We do have the details. We do have the details.
I'll get back to you on that one.
All right, the next one. First row, the lady with the, yes, please, number 4 there.
Datuk Sri,
Yes.
you mentioned earlier that
Excuse me, could you memperkenalkan diri?
Zarina from News Straits Times. I need to ask a question on the, earlier you mentioned that Sapura Kencana may be roped in to assist with the Bay of Bengal search. Why is that? Because since it was dismissed by Australian military, why do we still have to send in Sapura Kencana?
Well, I haven't decided yet whether to deploy the Sapura Kencana vessel. And as our standard operating procedure in the past, whether the leads includes landing in Nanning, whether satellite data from China, oil slicks, live rafts, live vests, those were all in the South China Sea, mind you. We will proceed based on corroborated and verified evidence. Secondly, you have to understand that this lead involving the Bay of Bengal is going, if we need to deploy assets, especially Sapura assets, to be responsible to them, to be responsible in our decision to deploy it, we have to understand it's going to be expensive. Secondly, it is the exact vessel that we are going to use to deploy in the new phase of our search. So any detour from that search is going to cause delay, 14 days exactly. And thirdly, in the event that this vessel is deployed and the lead is negative, can you imagine the families that have to go through another episode of hoping and finding closure to it? So these are all my considerations in having to deploy it, but I can assure you that as far as Sapura Kencana is concerned, they're ready to deploy it. But I'm just waiting feedback from what I've said just now on countries, neighboring countries, specifically Bangladesh and other countries that have deployed assets in that area to come back to me. Then I will then have to talk to Sapura Kencana whether we should actually deploy it or not. But we have not strayed away from our standard operating procedure, which is to make sure that in doing that, we do not affect the present search operations. It doesn't affect the emotions and the feelings of the families. And in this case, it will affect very expensive equipment and vessel, which might have to be detoured just because of this lead.
My second question would be, is there any specific reason on why Boeing is in the investigation team?
Boeing?
Yeah. And because since, would it be a conflict of interest since MAS and DCA has already set out the investigation team? That's my question.
Boeing not in the investigation team as such. They are an advisor to the accredited rep of the USA. And USA being the state of design, state of manufacture, and the accredited rep from the National Transport Safety Board of USA obviously needs a lot of input and information from Boeing, and that's the reason why Boeing, same like Rolls-Royce, representing the engine manufacturers, are in the part of the accredited rep team. Thank you.
All right. Yes, second row, the lady please.
Selamat petang Datuk Seri, saya Miarin Awal daripada Bilik Berita RTM TV. Saya ada dua soalan berdasarkan laporan awal semalam. Okey, pada jam 1.21 minit 13 saat, label radar MH370 hilang ada pada skrin radar KLA TCC. Tapi pada jam 1.38 minit HCMA TCC bertanya tentang kedudukan MH370. Kenapa mengambil masa selama 17 minit baru sedar MH370 dikesan hilang? Yang kedua, kenapa pusat penyelaras penyelamat RCC deaktif pada jam 5.30 pagi, sedangkan label radar yang kita tahu MH370 dikesan hilang pada jam 1.21 minit 13 saat, iaitu agak 4 jam jarak. Terima kasih.
Okey, saya boleh jawab soalan kedua, dan soalan pertama nanti Dato' Azhar boleh menjawabkannya. Pertamanya berhubung kait dengan maklumat yang telah pun didedahkan dengan laporan-laporan awal semalam. Kita dah jangka akan macam-macam soalan tambahan yang perlu dijawab. Dan ini satu perkara yang kita akan lalui kerana kita mahu telus, kita mahu apa yang dapati oleh kita supaya dapat dikongsi dengan orang ramai. Dan saya konsisten, tidak ada benda yang kita nak sembunyi daripada orang ramai. Cuma dalam konteks sama ada 4 jam, lama atau tidak, ini bukan untuk kita membincangkan di sini dan menentukannya. Kerana saya dimaklumkan dalam penerbangan Air France 6 jam atau 7 jam selepas tindakan diambil. Jadi benchmarking, penanda aras untuk tindakan berbeza, banyak bergantung kepada keadaan semasa. Dan kalau kita nak bincang di pihak media, semua ada pandangan masing-masing. Sebab itu saya syorkan kepada orang ramai dengan kita mewujudkan satu badan bebas yang dianggotai oleh pakar-pakar di dunia untuk menentukan tindakan kita ini. Biarlah badan bebas ini mengkaji dan meneliti, kerana dua insiden yang MH370 dengan Air France sahaja, kita tengok tindakan dalam Air France tu masanya jauh lebih lama daripada tindakan kita. Jadi kita tak boleh menyatakan sama ada tindakan kita ni lambat ke lewat ke. Ini banyak bergantung kepada siasatan susulan yang akan dibuat. Yang penting ialah kita wujudkan struktur, kita wujudkan panel bebas untuk menyiasat, dan ahli anggotanya merupakan pakar-pakar daripada dunia. Dan saya seperti yang Amat Berhormat Perdana Menteri sebut, ada benda yang Malaysia telah lakukan dengan baik, ada benda yang mungkin kita boleh lakukan dengan lebih baik. Dan kalau itu merupakan sesuatu yang dapatnya daripada panel bebas ini, saya rasa kita tak teragak-agak untuk mengambil tindakan yang sewajarnya.
Terima kasih Yang Berhormat. Pada 1.19 pagi, Kuala Lumpur Air Traffic Control Center telah mengarahkan pilot MH370 untuk menukar frekuensi kepada frekuensi radio Ho Chi Minh City Air Traffic Control Center. Dan selepas melalui Igari, waypoint Igari, maka dengan rasminya penyerahan pesawat tersebut terserah kepada kawalan Air Traffic Control Center Ho Chi Minh City. Dan sekiranya Ho Chi Minh City tidak dihubungi oleh pesawat tersebut, dalam protokolnya adalah 5 minit. Dan mengapa mereka mengambil 17 minit, itu biarlah siasatan badan bebas yang yang dinyatakan oleh Yang Berhormat Menteri tadi menjalani persiasatan mereka. Mengapakah 17 minit diambil oleh Ho Chi Minh City Control Center? Dan perkara yang sebegini yang juga yang dinyatakan oleh Yang Berhormat tadi juga amatlah ingin diketahui bukan saja Malaysia tapi juga oleh industri penerbangan awam. Mengapakah keadaan ini berlaku dan apakah yang berlaku dan apa yang patut dilakukan untuk keadaan sebegini tidak terjadi pada masa-masa yang akan datang.
Okay. The next question from the local side. Okay. Yang first row, Vijita.
Assalamualaikum Datuk Seri, saya Luqman, wartawan Berita Harian. Satu soalan kepada Tuan Ahmad Jauhari berkenaan dengan flight manifest. Difahamkan sebelum ni ada 38 rakyat Malaysia yang dalam penerbangan MH370. Bagaimanapun, selepas laporan awal itu dikeluarkan, hanya ada 34 nama yang disebut. Ada 4 lagi nama yang masih hilang. Kalau saya boleh sebutkan di sini, nama seperti Anne Catherine Daisy, Ji Jing Hang, Tan Xiao Peng dan Tek Teh Hin. Lebih buruk lagi, salah satu daripada nama itu dikategorikan sebagai warga Cina, sedangkan ia ialah Malaysian. Soalan kedua untuk Datuk Seri Syamuddin, ada pihak yang mempertikaikan laporan awal yang dikeluarkan ini lebih pendek atau ringkas kerana ia hanya 5 muka surat berbanding dengan 239 nyawa pada pesawat MH370 kalau nak dibandingkan dengan Air France 447 yang sepanjang 128 muka surat. Mungkin Datuk Seri ada sedikit komen berkenaan dengan itu. Dan soalan terakhir berhubung dengan cadangan daripada John Paul Trodek juga, adakah Malaysia Airlines akan mengambil inisiatif untuk memanjangkan jangka hayat bateri daripada 30 hari kepada 90 hari tanpa perlu menunggu arahan lanjut daripada ICAO? Sekian, terima kasih.
Yang soalan pertama mengenai manifesto, ini satu perkara yang saya akan kaji. Saya pun boleh katakan tak berapa tepat melalui information yang tadi beritahu tadi. Yang saya tahu kita ada 38 on board. So saya akan rujuk balik perkara ni. Yang kedua mengenai bateri, itu adalah satu standard, international standard. So kami sekarang ni sedang berusaha untuk mengkokohkan cara-cara kita track pesawat. Itu yang paling mustahak sekali.
Mengenai soalan laporan awal kita begitu tipis kalau nak bandingkan dengan Air France dan juga Silk Air daripada Singapura. Saya nak nyatakan sendiri keadaan dan kedudukan MH370 jauh berbeza dengan apa yang terpaksa dilalui oleh pasukan siasatan Silk Air dan juga Air France. Kerana dalam kes itu mereka dah tahu di mana kapal terbang itu berada. Dan saya percaya bahawa siasatan awal yang dibuat di Silk Air di Palembang contohnya, mereka boleh bekalkan dengan maklumat-maklumat yang mereka dapat kesan di kawasan berkenaan. Sama juga dengan Air France, dalam masa yang begitu singkat mereka dah jumpa debris kapal terbang berkenaan. Jadi itu satu perkara yang biasa, di mana kalau sekiranya ada maklumat tambahan, memanglah laporan yang dibekalkan lebih tebal. Dan dalam kes kita ni saya dah nyatakan luar biasa, di mana sampai hari ini kita tak dapat kesan di mana kapal terbang tidak kesan debris, tetapi tidak bermakna bahawa kita tidak mengikuti semua lead yang dipanjangkan kepada kita. Dan ini saya nak ingatkan kepada orang ramai bahawa lead berhubung kait dengan kesan minyak di lautan China. Kita lead yang menyatakan bahawa kapal terbang telah landing di Nanning, lead bahawa ada fireball dekat tengah-tengah oil rig lautan China pada ketika itu. Itu semua kita ikuti dan kita siasat dan mendapatkan bahawa apa yang dikatakan sebagai sesuatu yang menasabah didapati negatif. Takkan itu kita nak masukkan dalam laporan awal kita kepada ICAO. Beza dengan laporan-laporan awal daripada 2 kemalangan yang disebutkan tadi.
Okay. Yes, your question please.
Assalamualaikum Datuk Seri, saya Hilal Azmi dari Astro Awani. Okey, saya ada 2 soalan Datuk Seri. Pertamanya, apakah usaha kerajaan Malaysia dalam usaha untuk menyangkal tohmahan media asing yang bahawanya Malaysia tidak ambil tindakan untuk tempoh 4 jam pesawat tu hilang berdasarkan laporan awal. Dan yang kedua, soalan kedua saya ialah berapa jumlah pampasan kepada keluarga dan bila?
Pampasan daripada keluarga mungkin Dato' Hamzah atau AJ boleh jawab. Yang berhubung kait dengan 4 jam tadi saya dah jawab. Kerana dalam Air France, kalau saya bincang dengan Jean-Paul Trodek, tindakan diambil 7 jam selepas maklumat yang diterima. Keduanya, setiap insiden yang berlaku itu ada faktanya tersendiri. Tetapi kalau kita nak membuat bicara di peringkat media, di halayak orang ramai, tak ada kehabisannya. Ada yang sokong, ada yang tak sokong, ada yang kata panjang sangat, ada yang kata menasabah. Jadi lebih baik biar panel bebas yang dianggotai oleh pakar-pakar dunia menentukan sama ada tindakan kita itu menasabah atau tidak. Dan saya dah nyatakan tadi, dan Yang Berhormat Perdana Menteri sendiri telah menyatakan bahawa ada benda yang kita buat lakukan baik, ada benda yang kita lakukan tak baik. Dan kalau panel bebas menyatakan bahawa kita boleh perbaiki tindakan kita, biar benchmark dengan tindakan-tindakan dan tragedi lain supaya kita boleh pastikan tragedi sebegini tidak berulang.
Mengenai pampasan, jumlah tu akan kami beritahu kepada ahli keluarga dulu, ya, bukan kepada media, dan akan dibayar secepat mungkin.
All right, we'll now go to the foreign media. Yes, please, the gentleman in the center here, first row. Please, sir, could you introduce yourself?
Hi, Minister. I'm from China Central TV. Yes, in the past around half months, we noticed in the search in Australia, we use a lot of times about the Bluefin 21st. But you know, there's a depth limit about that, it's around 3,500. But you know, in the future, maybe the ocean will be much deeper. So we want to know what you will use some new technology or some new devices deployed for the searching? Thank you.
Thank you. In fact, for our listeners and viewers in China, the delegation that is going with us to Canberra next week is big. I mentioned in my earlier statement that it's going to be led by a minister and 2 deputy ministers. Experts will also be on board, and the agenda that has been set on Monday is not only on the issue of the status of the search, plan for the refocus and the intensified subsurface search, which you have requested and questioned me, sir. Australian reception plans for the families that will involve the NOKs, Malaysia and China's support for the search. I think it is very important now because in the past, the issue of finance, issue of costs never occurred. But to be fair to the Australians, I think it is now time for at least China and Malaysia to sit down and to discuss the way forward, which involves very sophisticated equipment. And then ongoing tripartite relation communications between the 3 countries. And finally, the public communication, like what we are doing today. The challenges that we facing the media, will now have to be multiplied by 3, because as we move into the new phase, we are talking about much more sophisticated equipment. I can share with the media that apart from military assets, which I have spoken, and our Prime Minister had an opportunity to mention to President Obama, there are more equipment that is assets available that I will be discussing with the US Navy. There are other research institutes in China, in Japan, in Germany that we are exploring in the next phase. And more importantly, as I alluded to just now, we are working with commercial entities, and the Malaysian companies at least have got together and moving on the same page with one flag to identify what we can contribute to the next phase. This I have informed Angus Houston this morning, and I think the structure is in place for us to first look into the areas of search, secondly look at the terrain under the sea, and thirdly to identify what sort of assets they are required. And some of them are much more sophisticated than the Bluefin 21. That I can assure you.
Yes, sir. In that corner, please.
CCTV News. Dr. Sri, from my mediocre Bahasa, I believe you already answered this question, but if you could give us the answer in English as well, about the 4-hour lag time between the plane disappearing and the alerting of the search and rescue.
Okay. I spoke to Jean-Paul through that, and the 4 hours lag time when he came to the Air France, this is an informal discussion with him, it took them 6 to 7 hours. So basically it is an issue as to whether 4 or 6 or 7, and whether that is reasonable. And I've indicated and then mentioned in Malay, in Bahasa just now, that it is not for us to be debating it here, because some have said that it is reasonable, some have said it's not. What I have done is actually formed a committee, which is led by experts, and let them compare whether the preliminary report, which is so thin in our case, compared to the Silk Air and the Air France, the 4 hours compared to the 6 hours in the Air France crash, let the experts decide. And like I said, Malaysia has got nothing to hide in this. And we cannot, because the world wants to know. And it is something that will affect the global, as Dr. Azhar said just now, it will affect the civil aviation, if not also the defense capability of all nations. So basically, I would leave it to the panel of experts to decide whether 4, 6, 7 hours is reasonable or not.
Yes, please. Yeah, front row second.
Hi, Mitra Mobashart from CNN.
Hi.
My question has to deal with the timeline that was put out by the ICAO report. At 1:21, when the plane disappeared off the radar, it wasn't until 1:38, 17 minutes later, that Ho Chi Minh Air Traffic Control notified KL Air Traffic Control that the plane dropped off the radar. I understand at that point it was in Vietnamese airspace and in their control, but how did nobody realize and notice on both sides that the plane had dropped off the radar? Did this not waste crucial time? And as well, at 2:03, when all parties were trying to find the plane at this point, Malaysia Airlines operations told air traffic control that the plane was actually over Cambodian airspace. Could you explain that?
The first part I think was answered in Bahasa. I think that Azhar can answer it now in English. The one about Cambodia, I think you can address that one too.
Yes, in that particular morning, 8th of March, at 1:19, the Kuala Lumpur Air Traffic Control Center have directed the pilots of MH370 to change frequency to Ho Chi Minh City Air Traffic Control Center, and the pilot replied, "Good night, Malaysian 370," and passing Igari, and that's the official point where the aircraft is handed over to Ho Chi Minh City Control Center, and that also at a time where we lost the radar on our screen. Why 70 minutes? This is what I've told in Bahasa also. That's up to the investigation team to study, to investigate. Maybe from the Vietnamese, why it takes 17 minutes, and this is a point where the world, the civil aviation needs to know at the point of handover, at the point of transfer from one flight information region to another flight information region, the protocols are being met or not, or there should be any improvement on the protocols. This is something I'm sure the investigation team will look deep and very hard at it, and would come up with their results and analysis and also recommendation. Thank you.
The Cambodian one? Not aware.
When Malaysian Air Traffic Control contacted Malaysia Airlines Operation Center, we have only a flight following program that actually doesn't show exactly where the plane is, because those flight following program, which many of you have in your iPads and iPod and your iPhones, work on the same principle because it's based off secondary source. So when they called, we just refer to a flight following program. So that's really for info. It's not something that we use for determining exactly where the plane is.
Right. Next question, please. Yes. No, here, in front. Thank you.
Morning. Good afternoon, sir. Just question for...
excuse me, could you...
Eileen from Associated Press. Just two questions. Number one, regarding the audio recording, some voice experts suggested that the recordings that were released yesterday were not from the original file and they may have been edited. So can you clarify whether the recordings that were released were the original ones and whether they have been edited? And then number two, back to the Cambodia issue for MAS, I would just like to clarify, because in the document it said that the plane seemed to have exchanged signals with another